Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar organized by BIBA in honor of Sir Geoffrey Adams, British Ambassador to Egypt. I'd like to start by thanking the Ambassador for taking the time to join us today. As the year comes to an end, I'm sure many of our members would like to gain some insights moving forward, as well as updates on the positive developments between Egypt and the UK in their trading relations, especially with all what is happening concerning Brexit. Congratulations are in order for the signing of the association agreement between Egypt and the UK. It's a strong indicator of the partnership between both countries, providing a framework for cooperation and further development of political, economic, and social and cultural links between our two nations. We're all very excited to hear Sir Geoffrey, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions awaiting him. I'd like to thank Dr.Ziad Bahaa-Eldin for moderating this session. Dr. Ziad is former Deputy Prime Minister and is Managing Partner of Bahaa-Eldin Law Office in cooperation with BonelliErede. And Dr. Bahaa-Eldin is also an old BIBA fellow. Our sponsors, of course, are providing valuable support. I'd like to recognize Savills as our main sponsor for today's event. I'd like also to recognize our event sponsors for their continuous support, namely CIB Egypt, Polaris Parks, and QNB Al-Ahli Bank. Without further ado, I'll leave the floor to our moderator, Dr. Ziad Bahaa-Eldin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nasser. Thank you, BIBA, for organizing this. And thank you, Sir Geoffrey, for being with us today. It's a real pleasure and honor to introduce and to have a dialogue with Sir Geoffrey. I have known him for many years as a friend, as an ambassador, and I was delighted, like many of you, when we all heard that he was to be posted back to Egypt. And I dare say that during the years that he's been with us, it's always been a very constructive relationship between Egypt and the UK, and I look forward to more of this. I'm sure all of you know Sir Geoffrey very well, but for those who are with us perhaps for the first time, I'd like to just give a very brief introduction about his career. He has been ambassador in Egypt this time. He's been in Egypt this time since September 2018. He was educated at Eton College, Oxford, where he studied Arabic and Islamic history before taking his degree in philosophy, politics, and economics. Sir Geoffrey joined the diplomatic service in 1979, and he spent his early career in Saudi Arabia, France, South Africa, and of course, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London. He was previously posted in Egypt in 1998 as Deputy Head of Mission. And following that, he was General Counsel in Jerusalem, Private Secretary to the Foreign Secretary, and Ambassador to Iran. He also served as Political Director General of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in 2009, and then following that as Ambassador to the Netherlands in 2013. He is here with his wife, Mary Emma, and their 3 teenage children come from time to time to visit us when the weather permits, when school permits, and more importantly now, when COVID permits. So we're delighted to have you with us. It's a real pleasure. And if you allow me, today we'll take the format of myself posing a few questions to Sir Geoffrey. I hope this will not take more than 35 minutes at most. We will then have some time for questions from the floor. If you have not sent questions by email, then please, you can still do so through the chat, the chat box on the on the computer. So we hope to conclude everything just a few minutes before 2 o'clock. And I'm again delighted to be with you today. So Geoffrey, let's start with the easy ones. Let's start with the upbeat questions and then see how we progress. So you must be very proud. You must be very proud that Britain has been from the start at the forefront of countries trying to find a breakthrough in the COVID vaccine situation. And you must be very proud that one of the 2 or 3 possible vaccinations that we are looking for has actually been discovered in the UK. And in fact, I heard in today's news that the vaccination has indeed started in the UK. You must be very proud with this going on. So what can you tell us about it? What can you tell us, not only as Egypt, but what can you tell the world about the prospect for the vaccination and when we can expect it to be rolled out in the rest of the world?
Well, thank you very much, Ziad, and thank you for doing this. And thank you everyone for submitting to yet another webinar. People will look back on 2020 not just as the year of coronavirus, but also as the year of the webinar, I suspect. We'll all be heartily sick of it. Before I just come to coronavirus, could I just start by expressing my appreciation in 1 or 2 directions. First of all, just to echo what Khalid Nosair said about Savills. We're very grateful to them for supporting this event. People sometimes say to me, what British companies are successful in Egypt at the moment? And actually, you've got no better example than Savills, as their little film showed. In only a couple of years, I think their office has grown from 2 people to 50 people. They're a very well-known player in the UK property business, and now I'm delighted that they're doing really well here in Egypt. So it's a very positive story that Savills have to tell, which we can all enjoy. But in addition, I just really wanted to thank Biba, actually, if I may, who have been working really hard and really successfully this year, I think, to promote trade and investment between the UK and Egypt. In government, you know, we're really conscious that it's not just all about us. We do, I hope, what we can, but in the end, it's businesses, it's people in different areas that actually put the substance into the relations between countries. And I think Biba have done a fantastic job, if I may say so, despite all the challenges of coronavirus, maybe going more online, doing more events of this kind, doing a very successful virtual trade mission to the UK a couple of months ago. So I really wanted to pay tribute to them before I said anything else. On coronavirus, you're right, I am rather proud of the role that Britain has played. My own university, Oxford, is one of the places where most progress has been made in the development of a vaccine, as you know, along with AstraZeneca, which is a British company. One of the things, just I might say, that gives me pride about Oxford is that it's not just British people working in Oxford who have got to this stage. It's an international team of men and lots of women, a team led by women who have made this achievement, and things like that make me very proud as well. And yes, I just saw an hour ago, on Twitter, there is a lovely film of a 90-year-old English granny getting the first vaccine, which is a very touching moment, actually, and gives us, as you said, gives us hope, doesn't it? It gives us the light is clear now at the end of the tunnel. I know what's going to happen in the UK. In other words, this vaccine and other ones are going to be rolled out progressively starting now, starting today. It's going to start the age cohorts going down, so starting with the most elderly people who are the most vulnerable. But it's also going to include the care workers and health workers, because they're important too. But I'm also proud that Britain's not just been involved and then played a leading role in the science, but also in what you might call the diplomacy of vaccine, because we were one of the countries involved with the World Health Organization in setting up a new international organization called COVAX, the objective of which is to ensure that when the vaccines become available, they are spread not just, or distributed not just quickly, but equitably around the world. And I think this is going to be a key issue for the world in the next months, because I think, you know, there are going to be some wealthy countries that have made solid arrangements to get lots of doses of the different vaccines. There are going to be less wealthy countries that are going to have more challenges. And I think it's incumbent on a country like the UK, which is relatively well off and relatively well organized, to work in the international community to make sure that there is a global effort to make sure that the vaccines are distributed according to need, according to medical need, and not according to where you live in the world. So I think that will be a major issue for the first few months of 2021. As far as Egypt is concerned, the president himself has talked about, I think he mentioned May, as a target for really the widespread production of the vaccine in Egypt. Egypt, with our encouragement, has signed contracts in the context of this organization, COVAX, that I mentioned. So I think, generally speaking, if I had to guess, I would say that in the first few months of 2021, we'll see a very significant rollout of vaccines, you know, around the world. And we all hope and pray, of course, that that will lead progressively to the reduction of travel restrictions and the rest of it, and so will allow the world to start getting back to something approaching normal.
Very good. Well, it is very encouraging news, and you know, we all wish the UK all the luck in getting this done, and really look for more news as the months progress. Now, of course, Brexit is going to have to be our main topic today. We were all very busy following up on Brexit news for a few years, and then it kind of disappeared a little bit from the radar as COVID news took over. But now it's back, and it's very important, and we're coming close to the end of the year, and big decisions will have to be made. In addition, of course, to the fact that Egypt now has a decent agreement in place with the UK. So I'm putting the two together, really, because I'd like you to comment on what we should expect by end of the year. Should the UK sign or not sign an agreement with the EU? And then, in conjunction with this, how would that affect trade with Egypt in light of our own bilateral arrangement now? So we need really to understand and to see the two scenarios going forward, and whatever you can comment on this at this stage.
No, thanks for that. And I think, if I may say so, you're absolutely right to link the two, because they're the questions that will be in the minds of business people and others. So first of all, on the relations between the UK and the EU, let me just sort of sketch in the background a little bit first. First thing to say is that Brexit has already happened, to be clear. The UK left the EU at the end of January this year, 2020. So we are no longer a member of the EU. Brexit has happened. The question now is, what should be the trading relationship between the UK and the EU at the end of the transition period, which our withdrawal agreement set up, the transition period, which lasts until the end of this year, 2020. So that's the deadline that people are talking about. And so the issue really of the negotiations has been, should the UK have a very close trading relationship with the EU, which would allow our goods lots of tariff-free access to the EU single market, in exchange for which we would need to agree quite a substantial coverage of EU rules in our market, or, and that would be on the analogy of a country like Canada, for example, or should we have a rather more distant relationship with the EU, on the example of a country like Australia, for example, which would give us less tariff-free access to the markets, but frankly more freedom to set our own rules. That is the trade-off which experts like you know is at the heart of this question. And that's a genuine economic and political judgment to be made. And that's why the negotiations have been difficult and complicated. And they are approaching their climax as we speak. And if you look at the news today, there's been lots of ups and downs in the last few days. Last night, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said he was going to go to Brussels tomorrow or the next day for one final attempt to see if we can reach an agreement. And if it is an agreement, you know, you've seen, I'm sure, in the press what the sticking points are about: access by EU fishermen to British waters, things like that, you can imagine. But I think that the essential issue is the one I've tried to describe. In other words, how much access in exchange for how many rules. and that is still not resolved. But I think on this, to be honest, I'm pretty optimistic either way. In other words, if we don't have an agreement with the EU this week or next week, it won't be the end of the world. It just means that some tariffs will come in, and I'm sure there will be in the short term some disruption to trade, which will be a pity. But in the medium term, and I'm sure in the long term, things will be fine. Because in the end, the UK, as you know, is a very large, diverse economy, 6th largest in the world or whatever it is, with lots of resilience built into it. And I'm very confident that that resilience will see us through any bumpiness. And in the end, as we recover from build back from COVID, we'll get back to strong growth that lots of countries. Incidentally, I think it's one thing that the UK economy shares with Egypt. I think the Egyptian economy, I think, is very resilient and has withstood the stresses of coronavirus better than many around the world. So that's where we stand on the negotiations. So frankly, we'll see. I don't know. No one knows, I don't think, whether they'll reach an agreement this week. But whether they do or whether they don't, I think it will not be the end of the world. As far as the UK and Egypt is concerned, the picture is much clearer, as you rightly said, Ziad. I was delighted on Saturday afternoon to sign the new UK-Egypt Association Agreement. And I think that the significance of it is that it gives certainty and predictability to trade between the UK and Egypt. I don't want to oversell it. This is what we call a continuity agreement. So in other words, it preserves and continues the trading arrangements that the two countries enjoyed when they were covered by the EU-Egypt agreement. So it just replicates those preferences, trade preferences, and puts them into a new bilateral UK-Egypt agreement. So it's not a great change, but it means that on the 1st of January, when we finally leave the trading aspects of the EU, there is no need for disruption for trade between the UK and Egypt. And just to be clear, that's the case whether or not the UK reaches an agreement with the EU. Do you see what I mean? So that the UK-EU so-called Brexit negotiations are quite separate to the UK-Egypt negotiation, which has been successfully concluded. The final thing I just say is that I think that although there are no great new breakthroughs, it's about continuity rather than change, I do think that the fact that the UK and Egypt have been able to reach this agreement sends quite a powerful signal, frankly, to the business communities, both in the UK and in Egypt, of the government's determination to press ahead with this. And one of the aspects of the agreement was a commitment to look ahead to the future, to see whether we could improve access for example, Egyptian goods to the UK, whether we can improve access for British services to Egypt. And as I say, I don't want to make a promise that that'll happen next year or immediately, but it'll happen in the future, I'm sure. And now we have the framework for a trade relationship between the UK and Egypt that suits us. In other words, we can negotiate what works for the UK and for Egypt. We don't have to worry about Greece or Lithuania or Slovenia. We can negotiate and agree what works for us. And I think that's a powerful and quite an optimistic, positive sign for the future. I hope that makes sense.
It does, but I'll follow up briefly on this.
Please.
You say it's not the end of the world anyway. Yesterday, I heard a comment from one of the senior European negotiators on television saying that Brexit was about the UK exiting the European Union. What's happening now is about the UK exiting Europe more broadly. You sound too optimistic. You sound more optimistic than I thought. So are you being optimistic, or is he and the European negotiators being too dramatic? They're of course saying that this all depends on the UK. So what's your sense about this sense of, you know, a historical moment about to take place, and therefore perhaps not the end of the world, I hope, but not as simple as you seem to make it? What's your
It's not. No, you're right, Ziad. I don't want to underestimate the significance of the moment. But I do think that the person you quoted there was overdoing it, because I think one really important point to bear in mind is we may be leaving the European Union, but we're certainly not leaving Europe. And you know, Britain remains a European country. If you look at the map, we remain a member of NATO, so our security is indissolubly linked with those of our European partners. In lots of different ways, our future will be inextricably linked with our European neighbours and our European friends. And those things are just not going to change. We're leaving a particular club, and a club that a lot of people in continental Europe, and I think we Brits should have the emotional intelligence to understand that. A lot of people in continental Europe attach huge significance to the European Union for historical reasons. I think we need to understand that, and we should be careful not to belittle that. But the fact is, we are leaving this particular club. We're not leaving Europe, and there are lots of ways in which we'll be committed. Trade between, the reason I say it's not the end of the world is the trade between the UK and Europe is not going to stop. It might be perturbed for a few weeks or months, but it will carry on, because it always has and it always will. And we share so much. We share values, we share geography, we share history with our neighbours. You know, France is, whatever it is, 23 miles away. That's not going to change. And that's what makes me, in the end, optimistic. So what I'm doing is that I'm trying to take emotion out of it. I'm taking emotion and I'm taking politics out of it. I'm trying to look at it in a sort of objective and a dispassionate way. And that's what makes me optimistic and positive. But I accept that for many people this is, including in Britain, where, as you know, the debate continues to go on. For many people it is an emotional and a political subject. And there are strongly held views on both sides of the argument.
Okay, well, let me move then to investments. Now, when I was head of GAFI, the Investment Authority, many years ago, the UK was the #1 foreign direct investor in Egypt. And there is no reason for me to assume that this has changed significantly. I mean, it may be competing with 1 or 2 other countries at most, but it certainly must be on the top list still. Investment, FDI, has slowed down a little bit over the last few years. And we're all talking now and thinking and advising on how to bring back investments to a much higher level and more sustainable level, especially post-COVID. What do you think can be done? What should we do on the Egyptian side? Let me put it less diplomatically. What would you advise your Egyptian counterparts here when the subject of investments comes up?
I'm smiling because, of course, I'm always cautious about giving lessons to people, Egyptians, how to run their own country. But look, yes, we are still, according to GAFI's own figures, the leading investor, certainly the leading Western investor. And so that does give us a certain insight. And I'm talking, as you know, I talk to investors all the time. I recently set up a forum for British investors since I've been here in this country, so that we can exchange experiences and learn from each other. And that works really well. And so I have picked up some things from there. I think I'd probably say 2 or 2.5 things. The first thing is that I'm really struck how often British investors and would-be investors come back to the theme of economic reform in Egypt. In other words, many of them say explicitly that if the authorities had not launched this ambitious program of macroeconomic mainly reform a few years ago, painful as it is for Egypt and for Egyptian people, frankly, would not have made it possible for them to come. So the prospect of the reform that has been done already and the reforms that are promised for the future is really important to them. And you know them, what they are, better than anyone. But I reflect this back to Egyptian ministers when I say that, you know, when you are under pressure and when you are taking all the political pain that comes with economic reform, remember the benefits and remember that this is a significant factor in attracting the FDI that you want. The other thing I'd say is that, there is this famous ease of doing business index. I can't remember who produces it, one of the UN organizations, I think. But it's a matter of fact that Egypt is not very high in the ease of doing business index. And the business people here report that business can be complicated to do business here. To take one specific example, this is my half point. The one that's often quoted is customs procedures, for example. Despite the various efforts that have been made over the years to simplify and to streamline customs procedures here, in Egypt to this day, as far as I'm aware, compared to many of its competitors, customs procedures are still onerous. And that can, as you know, can constitute a brake on investment, or can be a disincentive. Because I think that the point I keep getting across or try to get across to Egyptian government spokespeople, well, they know this very well, but I say it all the same, is that Egypt is competing, is that there is capital available in London, in the UK, that big multinational companies based in the UK are looking around the world about where to put their money. And they're comparing countries all the time. And obviously they compare Egypt with other emerging markets. And Egypt needs to compete with these people in order to attract the investment. So to summarize, I think if they press ahead with economic reform and move into the structural reforms of the economy that most economists think are necessary, that would be a big help. And then press ahead with making Egypt a better place to do business, simplifying procedures, cutting bureaucracy, encouraging enterprise. That's the best way to attract FDI from anywhere in the world, but including from the UK.
So emphasis on bureaucracy and procedures, rightly so. I should just perhaps point out that a month ago, Parliament approved and the President issued a new customs law. So hopefully that should lead to some improvement in our ranking on the trading aspect of doing business. How about tourism? I'm personally lost, I have to tell you. I'm personally lost as to where Egypt stands in terms of tourism, notwithstanding, of course, the current disturbance caused by COVID, absolutely understandable. But a few years ago, there was the issue of security and terrorism, and then this kind of began to ease away a little bit. Now, in a post-COVID world, should we expect restrictions related to health and safety and so on, or do you think that it will be relatively easy for Egypt to come back on the map of tourism? And I mean, of course, especially the UK.
Yeah. Look, I think both of those things are true. Let me explain. But first, let me just say, to explain about this business about security, because I know that the issue of the UK's suspension of direct flights from the UK to Sharm el-Sheikh put a kind of shadow over our relationship for several years and was very painful, I know, here. But the good news, as I hope you saw, is that last autumn we fixed that problem, and direct flights to Sharm el-Sheikh were restored after a process of cooperation between the British and Egyptian authorities. And I was really glad about that, because that removed this, as I say, this cloud that had hung over our relationship. Now, there will always be what we call travel advice. In other words, the UK will always advise its travellers about difficulties and problems everywhere in the world, and Egypt is no exception to that. And yes, that will include health issues. So, for example, when COVID hit, the UK advised its British people against travel to the entire world. It said, don't travel anywhere because of the risk of bringing coronavirus back in. Now, what we're doing is, one by one, as countries make great progress in dealing with the pandemic, we're setting up limited corridors which allow people to return to the UK without having to do quarantine. At the moment, in a country like Egypt, for example, you have to quarantine when you return to the UK. And that is obviously a constraint on tourism. So we're in touch with the Egyptian authorities about this. We hope it'll change in the future. The issue, frankly, in Egypt, the problem, if I can put it this way, is that Egypt doesn't test as many people as many other countries do for coronavirus. That's just a procedure here. So it makes it hard to prove in an objective way, and this is all done by doctors objectively, it's got nothing to do with politics or assessments. It's hard to prove objectively that the level of the disease has come down if you're not testing as many people here as you would in other countries. So it won't be a straightforward process. But that need not constrain the bounce back of tourism. Because, for example, Egypt Air is flying every day between London and Cairo as we speak. British Airways did and are going to do again, restarting later this month. Even EasyJet, which is a holiday airline, as you know, is flying flights from the UK to Sharm el-Sheikh and Khada'a and so on. So I'm optimistic that the tourism industry is actually very resilient and that it will bounce back quite fast, even though, this is what I mean about the two things between. Yes, there will be restrictions of different kinds on travel. I mean, Egypt requires a PCR test, as you know, to enter into Egypt in the first place. There will be restrictions, but I think people will travel despite those restrictions because people want to travel. People like their holidays. European people like their holidays, and British people love their holidays in Egypt. And it's the attractions of Egypt, whether the antiquities or the sun or the sea, you know, they're not going to change. And I'm very optimistic that they will bring British tourists back to Egypt soon.
I'll go back to investment from one angle. We always speak about investment and FDI in terms of volumes, numbers, you know, who ranks first, how many $1 billion and so on.
Oh.
I personally find UK investment in Egypt important on another front, which is where it's involved in developing the foundations of human capital development, if you like. So in health, in education, in culture. And I think that this aspect of investment is often overlooked when it's just about numbers. What can you tell us about this? What interests does the UK have in Egypt on these issues? Are you involved at all? I know there were some initiatives on education. I hope you're involved in the health insurance law, universal health insurance. So what can you tell us about this?
No, you're absolutely right, Ziad, and I agree with you about the impact. You know, investment is not just homogeneous, as it were. It's very different. It's very varied and has different impacts. And no, I'm glad that you've given me the opportunity to speak about education generally, because this is I would say this is a booming sector between the UK and Egypt, and it doesn't always get the attention it deserves. So in higher education, for example, you know, 2 or 3 times a week, I get visitors from UK universities who are actively considering investing in Egypt. Now, sometimes this will be a bricks and mortar investment. So, for example, just in the last year, Coventry University and the University of Hertfordshire have actually set up branch campuses in the new administrative capital, and they're admitting students in both cases in the hundreds. So that's at one end of the thing, which obviously is a very physical investment. But at the other end, universities are cooperating with Egyptian universities over syllabuses, over teaching, over qualifications, over assurance, and ultimately over degrees. So there's a huge number of models available to British universities, and they're really going for it because I think they see the potential of the Egyptian market in terms of the quality and the quantity of students who are keen to have a British style, quality higher education. So we think that there are now over 80, that's 80 British universities who are active in Egypt in one way or another. As I say, ranging from the branch campus, the British University itself, of course, but also lots of other universities do lots of other things. And this is happening, as I say, sometimes with us, sometimes through the British Council, sometimes completely independently. But it's all investment and it's all good. And then just finally to add a word about the secondary education, is that, again, the British syllabus and British exams are going from strength to strength in Egypt. Just before the virus hit, I was invited by the British Council to speak to a conference they were organizing of the principals of schools offering British exams. And so, you know, the French are always going, oh, we've got our wonderful lycée, and the Germans have got a lovely school, you know, a school or 2 schools. And I thought there might be, I don't know, we all know there are British schools in Cairo, maybe a dozen, maybe 20. Do you know, there are 135 school principals in the room. 135 Egyptian schools are offering GCSEs, A-levels, IB, all these things, and they wanted to talk to the British Council about those exams. So that represents literally thousands of Egyptian kids getting what I like to think of is a quality education. And you're quite right, you say, you know, this is increasing the kind of skills of the labor force. This is upskilling Egypt. This is making the young Egyptians more internationally minded, speaking better English, better able, frankly, to compete in the modern world. And so they make, it is a kind of intangible human investment, or an investment in human capital, which I think is massively important. And yes, it's a real priority for us at the moment.
I couldn't leave you without a semi-political question, just semi. And I ask this because we are, I think, Egypt and the UK, very much over the disagreements that took place a few years ago over political Islam. How do you see, and frankly, I think that you played, I think, a very big role in kind of normalizing relationships again between our two countries. How do you see this going forward? Do we have a healthy dialogue between our governments on issues of governance and political reform and so on?
Yes, it's a short answer. We do have a healthy relationship.
I'm hoping for a longer answer, though.
Sorry?
I'm hoping for a longer answer than.
Yeah, you get a bit longer than that, don't worry. Yeah, a bit longer than yes. Look, I think on the political side and the relationship between the governments, the most significant event of the last couple of years was the visit of the president to London in January this year, because it kind of set the tone. It put in the past some of the disagreements that, as you say, there have been, including over the flights to Sharm. It gave the president a podium. He was the keynote speaker at an Africa Investment Summit, so set a very sort of economic and investment context for the visit. He went twice to Buckingham Palace and was treated with respect by the royal family. And above all, he had a good long meeting with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, which really covered the entire waterfront. And I know because I was there. And the two of them agreed that they wanted, exactly as you put it, to put in the past some of the bumpiness that there had been in the relationship, and to take it to the next level. And actually, education, what we've just been talking about, was one of the big themes. And the president was really insistent that he wanted more British higher education, and the prime minister was equally interested, say that he would do whatever he could to follow up. But yes, I think that includes on the political side as well. And I think we've seen a significant uptick, I would say, in the quality of the dialogue we have with Egypt, particularly on regional issues, on regional crises like Libya, Palestinian issue where Egypt and the UK see absolutely eye to eye, other regional issues where we see eye to eye. The cooperation between us has improved, and we have a good dialogue. Now, that doesn't mean to say we will never have disagreements, but the objective of all this is to create a sort of solid load-bearing structure. So when things do happen from time to time, we can cope with it and press on. And this is normal, as I say, this is normal between two big countries that have a long and complicated history. And there are lots of other countries we have that kind of relationship with.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your candidness and your clarity. So these are my own questions. I have already received some questions from participants. One of them is about the trade agreement between the UK and Egypt. I think you've covered that very clearly. The other one is, and I would quote, what in your experience has been the most mutually rewarding form of cooperation between Egypt and the UK? That's an easy one.
I would have, if I hadn't been talking about it, I would have said education, because I do think that some of these university partnerships are fantastically good. I'll mention another one, because I'm a particular fan of a particular development project we have, which is about women's participation in the labor force. And basically, we work with Egyptian entrepreneurs running factories like ready-made garments, these kind of suits that we wear, which are made in Egypt and exported to Europe and the UK. Also the fruit and vegetable industry. We work with them to make their workplaces more friendly for women. And that could be to do with the transport arrangements, the conditions in which they work, things as simple and as banal as, do they have proper lavatory facilities for women in factories? But this is the most fantastic win-win situation, because the entrepreneurs benefit because women, as we all know, work harder and improve the productivity of the factory. More women come into the labour force, which means that they pay taxes. It also means that they start their families later, which means they have fewer children, which helps with the population growth issue in Egypt. And they are more likely to send the children they have to school in order to let them go to work. And the British consumer benefits by having the product when it goes back to the UK. So that's an example of a kind of thoughtful, imaginative, not hugely costly intervention that can actually produce huge benefits. When I went and visited one of the factories and heard about it, I was very enthused.
Very good. The following question, it is about the post-Brexit trade agreement between Egypt and the UK again. However, it has a different angle, and that's why I think we should actually tackle it. And it talks about how this will help the private sector in both countries. More specifically, and this is the part I like about it, is the UK embassy, and I'm quoting, will the UK embassy be facilitating and supporting such engagement, and how? In other words, I think it's trying to say, we understand the big picture. Practically speaking, what will happen? How can your presence and your team help further this?
Yeah, we'll carry on doing what we have been doing, but we will do it more intensively than ever. So we have a section of the embassy which reports to the Department for International Trade. So this is the government department in the UK that is responsible for British exports. And we have sector specialists within the team who know the energy sector, who know the infrastructure, who know the oil and gas sector, for example. And it's their job to identify opportunities for British business and then to connect those people, whether from the British side and the Egyptian side. And in that, they work extremely closely with BIBA, with the Egyptian-British Chamber of Commerce in London, and with other partners, including banks and law firms who are doing a similar thing of sort of matchmaking. So yes, we will use, on the back of the trade agreement, our intention is to redouble our efforts. The Prime Minister's trade envoy to Egypt, who many BIBA members will know, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, a member of Parliament, has just been reappointed, I'm delighted to say, because he is one of the hardest working trade envoys that we have. And he's looking to come, or actually we were in touch with him today about coming in the new year. And so he's going to come as soon as the travel arrangements allow. And I think his visit will provide a boost to the kind of renewed promotion of trade and investment that we're looking to do on the back of the trade agreement.
I'm personally still curious to know if there is any UK involvement with the Egyptian government on the health sector, and specifically on the universal health insurance. It's a big plan, you know. It's supposed to be rolled out in 10 years. Is there any involvement, bearing in mind the experience that the UK has on this subject? Exactly.
Well, the Minister of Health herself has told me several times that she looks to the British National Health Service for inspiration, because I think the key principle that medical facilities, that healthcare should be free at the point of delivery, which, as you know, is the fundamental principle of the British National Health Service, which is funded from general taxation. They're very keen, I think, to bring that philosophy into the Egyptian system. And so we've been helping, yes, with technical expertise, with explaining this kind of stuff. Also, actually, a British company sponsored some of the first groups of Egyptian family doctors who went to the UK to learn how general practitioners work. Because without getting into the detail, one of the things that the new Egyptian system is going to bring in, and again, I find this very inspiring, is the concept of the family doctor as the gatekeeper, the gateway to secondary and tertiary care, to specialist medical care. One of the big problems, as you know, with Egyptian healthcare is that there are many good doctors here. There's lots of good healthcare available, including at very highly qualified and specialist levels. But access to it is regulated according to ability to pay, not according to medical need. And this is the revolution that most people think needs to happen in Egypt. In other words, people should get access to the highest levels of medical care according to their medical condition, not according to where they live in Egypt or whether they're able to pay. And I think, so we're helping that. I don't want to pretend it's not a huge area of financial investment for the UK. There are lots of connections, but mostly they're professional connections and they're technical connections. And I think that's what's inspiring, and that's what we are doing in the embassy. We do whatever we can to encourage that.
One last question from our participants, and that is about the export side from Egypt. So basically, it says, what would you advise? What is your opinion? Are Egypt's most export-ready sectors? How would you advise us to progress in terms of sectors that are ready for exporting to the UK?
It's hard for me to do that because, to be honest, we spend our time in the embassy doing the opposite job. In other words, looking for Egyptian importers for British products rather than looking for British markets for Egyptian products. So it's a kind of byproduct of what we do. All I would know is really just anecdotally, from what I see, and also what I see when I do my shopping when I'm back in the UK, is that I do think that foodstuffs, fruit and vegetables, are doing really well at the moment in the UK from Egypt, whether it's strawberries or whether it's new potatoes or whatever, and that the prospects are really good, because I think there's a massive market for that in the UK, British supermarkets, and I think British consumers like Egyptian products, and I think the Egyptian products, which are improving in quality all the time, are increasingly going to get into the very competitive world of British supermarkets. So that's just an example. But I mean, let me take one other example, which I only discovered by chance. One of the nice things that happened throughout the nightmare of coronavirus is that when things were really tough in Britain, when the National Health Service was under real pressure in about March or April, and protective equipment for British doctors and nurses was short, we found in Egypt a supplier of hospital gowns that was able to help. And it turned out, and we didn't know this before, but hospital gowns, those gowns that patients put on in hospitals, are being produced in Egypt in large quantities to excellent international standards that meet the requirements of the National Health Service. And we established the connections, and we got shipments of several million, I think it was, of those gowns, which helped the British National Health Service at an absolute crucial juncture. And I thought that was a lovely story of sort of perhaps slightly surprising, but sort of mutually beneficial trade, which gave us in the embassy a lot of satisfaction.
Very good. Well, if we have no more questions from our participants, then I'm really very delighted to have had this opportunity. Thank you very much for your presence with us today, for everything you're doing to improve and strengthen the Egyptian-UK relationship. And with this, I hand over to Mr. Nusir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ziad.
Thank you, Dr. Ziad. So Geoffrey, thank you very much for your time and for the insight you've given us all. It was a lot of question marks that you've kindly answered to everyone. We thank you very much, and wish you all the best for Christmas and for the new year, and hopefully we'll be able to all meet in person very soon, and all the best for all our guests and participants today, and I will leave you all.
Fine. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Khaled, and thank you, Ziad, very much, and thank you, and happy Christmas to all your members.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.